The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program for another week. I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis, and in the Robert Carnegie Endowed Chair is Reverend Karl Zarowski, as Robert couldn't be with us today. Hi, folks.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Hey, Ben.
Let's get started as we talk about different articles and different stories that are going around in the news. One is to a neighbor to the north in Chesapeake, Virginia, where Chesapeake, Virginia City Council has recently voted, just last night, in fact, voted to accept the motto, "In God We Trust," to be displayed in City Council chambers. Now, this was an effort that took place between Councilwoman Susie Kelly and U.S. Representative Randy Forbes, Republican from Chesapeake, who's a founder and chairman of the Congressional Prayer Caucus, and also the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, which is a Chesapeake-based organization that plans to donate a plaque bearing the words, "In God We Trust," to the City Hall to be displayed. It's a controversy that seems kind of puzzling sometimes because it is our national motto. And it is something that a lot of that our money also proclaims. But Doc, this has started this effort and kind of coinciding with other efforts to put different things, plaques in city halls or in government buildings. This has stirred up some controversy in some places, not apparently in Chesapeake, but some other places.
It has all across the country, actually. You know, with so much of our Christian faith now embattled as it is, and our morality being eroded, there are groups of people, there are remnants of people who are trying to establish lines in the sand, I guess I would call it, and to reestablish some of the things that we as a country believe in, which always brings up some kind of a constitutional frustration, or at least a state-level frustration. A lot of this began in Orange County, California. As you probably know, it was the Orange County Republicans and religious leaders that really went town to town doing the same thing. And this is probably about 2 years ago, I think, maybe. Mm-hmm. And as of now, there are probably 8 or 9 cities in Orange County, California, which is largely Republican, which have replaced that motto on walls, signage, official city documents, those kinds of things. So Chesapeake is really the first I've read about on the East Coast. But this has been a real big move in California for quite some time. It was surprising to me, actually, that the legislation to have that motto replaced was passed without really a lot of frustration. In fact, I think you guys told me it passed unanimously, right?
In this Chesapeake City Hall, yes,
right.
They voted last night, 7-0.
7-0, yeah. That's a little bit surprising, but that's. As I say, they're just they're catching on to a wave which started on the West Coast and has moved across the country. You notice you don't read a lot of stories about this in the Midwest because, and I come from the Midwest, a lot of Midwest town halls already have that on it.
So again, it is a national motto. It is on our coins, but there has been a movement to eradicate this from public buildings and even from coinage, especially from coinage. And Karl, here the original article on this, when they were considering it, mentioned Saluda, North Carolina, as having voted against this because they thought it would be divisive. Isn't that interesting, Karl? That we are finding this, which has been honored in the United States now at its 60th anniversary. It was first passed during the Eisenhower administration, and it had been kind of largely accepted and had been on money before then, but was created as a national motto in the 50s, and again celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So it's interesting that that's become divisive.
It is, and the talk about the division Like Doc, I was surprised when I read that it had passed 7-0, because I expected that there would be some division, among those who were voting for it. Also, the article that I read about the passage of this, there really wasn't much discussion in the article about any discussion that happened.
Yes, there was one person who objected.
One person who objected, and that person's objection, she said, it's not offensive in any way, but it is divisive.
Right.
And she said if there's one building or room that should be representing everyone in the city, it's this one. Now, as I read this article, I then went down and read some of the comments that people made about the article. And did this decision cause some division? Oh, yes. Especially, nowadays you read an article online and you want to see division.
Yeah.
Go look at the comments. And if you want to get some really nasty, angry comments, get into one, read an article about religion, especially about Christianity. And you'll hear a lot of arguments from people against it. And all of a sudden, instead of it being about a little plaque that says, "In God we trust," it becomes an argument against people believing in mythology and people believing in ancient fairy tales.
It goes all different ways. Right. Now, but I took a different tact because I noticed in the article a lot of online articles use tags. They put different tags that you can either use to reference this article or other things. And one of them was called the Original Motto Project, which I wasn't aware of. So I went and looked it up, and the Original Motto Project has a Facebook page, and they talk about E pluribus unum. E pluribus unum, really pronounced right, is the original motto and should be the only motto that the U.S. has, and should be the only one that's on coins. And they have a project called Stamp Out "In God We Trust," where people actually stamp money with or write on it E pluribus unum as a replacement for "In God We Trust," which is interesting because that used to be against the law to desecrate money.
But they're both there.
But they're both there.
Yeah,
that's right.
They're both on our coinage.
Now, but they also cite on their Facebook page, they cite that Roosevelt was in favor of dropping "In God We Trust" from money. And they cite an article about it. Well, in that article, which they give you a link to, he actually says that he believes that it cheapens it to put it on money. It cheapens "In God We Trust," and it should be a more reverential, and it's almost sacrilegious to put it on money. But what he does say, he says, it is a motto which is indeed well to have inscribed on our great national monuments, in our temples of justice, in our legislative halls, and in buildings such as those at West Point and Annapolis. In short, wherever it will tend to arouse and inspire a lofty emotion to those who look thereon.
Well, this all came about because of the huge emotion and religious sentiment that came out of the Civil War. It was during that time that we began to see this motto get placed on money and buildings, etc. And it wasn't until 57 or so that it became our
56,
an official motto, right? But I told you guys before we started, I travel with a bag full. Well, not full. I don't want to get robbed. I travel with a bag that always has at least 2 or 3 Eisenhower dollars in it. And my local banker is very kind to me. When they come in, she keeps them aside and she gives them to me for $1 because she knows I give them away. And I take these dollars with me, particularly to restaurants, and I talk to waitresses when they come over to the table, ask them, have you seen this? Do you know whose head is on it? And usually they have almost exclusively, they have no idea who it is. And after I explain about Dwight David Eisenhower, I ask them to look down below his figure and read the words to me that are there. It says, "In God We Trust," of course. And the piece of history that we want to leave with our kids is that the reason that this appears on our money is not simply because of the religious sentiment alone, but because we as a nation wanted, and this is Dwight Eisenhower's thinking, was we should be reminded that even though my head is on this coin, you shouldn't trust me. And even though you're holding money, you shouldn't trust money. Now, that's actually a very biblical stand, isn't it? I mean, don't put your trust in man, don't put your trust in money, and rightly put your trust in God. So every time I look at a coin, I'm reminded not to trust this coin, not to trust the government that's behind it, not to trust the men in power, but to trust God who reigns.
This is again a controversy that when people want to stamp it out or want to exclude it, it's interesting that e pluribus unum is held up in a higher standard here when it as you said they both appear, because it's both. We both want to be able to trust the God who's enshrined us to have this and allowed us to have this wonderful nation, but also to say that together we are one. So it seems to me it's a non-fight. I mean, it's a battle that doesn't need to even take place.
Well, if things keep going the way they're going in this country, there's going to be a movement to stamp out e pluribus unum, because there's as much division here as there's ever been. There's as much division today as there was North and South or the gangs of New York. I mean, we're really becoming a more divided country along racial lines, along political lines. And the lines have changed, the groups have changed. But I don't know how e pluribus unum we really are right now.
Well, with that thought, we will come back and we'll take a look at one of the things that also seems to be dividing us greatly is elections. And more on that coming up in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM107 and AM1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM107 and AM1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert. I was going to say Robert. I'll do that by habit, don't I? Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Karl Zorowski. And Robert could not be with us today. But we are talking about the elections in a different sort of angle today. This comes from a website called stream.org. And they have two opinion pieces about the lesser of two evils. One is titled that, and the other one isn't, but we'll get to that in a second. But the one that's titled The Lesser of Two Evils by James Randall Robison starts off by retelling the King Solomon story and the story of dividing the baby. We know the story as being the story of two moms who both claim a child, and Solomon says, well, the only wise thing to do, or the only fair thing to do, is to split the baby between the two. And the mother, the real mother, is horrified and says, no, she can have the child. And the article says at the end of it, says, Solomon knew the truth. The true mother thought not of herself, but of her child. She risked losing part of herself solely for the benefit of her son. When faced with two horrible choices, she lovingly chose the lesser of two evils. Solomon, demonstrating his true wisdom, awarded the rightful mother her son. In her willingness to sacrifice her pride for the benefit of her child, she saved both herself and her future. So here's a question for you, the author writes. When faced with a choice that seems the lesser of two evils, will you think of yourself or those who will be most affected by your decision? Can you risk a personal embarrassment and loss in order to save those you love? Choose wisely. Your future depends on it. Companion piece, written by Calvin Beisner, has the awkward title of Why You Mustn't Not Vote for the Lesser of Two Evils. And he starts off by saying, millions of conscious, God-honoring Christians all over America face an anguishing choice. Do I vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? Both with despicable moral character, or do I vote for some other candidate or not at all? And then he says, let's try to untangle this knotty problem. I found the untangling to be a very difficult task, and his logic. And Doc, let me just start with you here too. He does go through kind of a convoluted logic of if you don't vote for either A or B and you vote for C, it's a lot of algorithms in here. Eventually, I think it was math class I skipped, I think, and I was good at math, but it is tough. But he has a point. What do you think is the point he's trying to make?
That was a really good way of passing that over to me.
Yes, that's right.
It is. It's absolutely algebraic. And the reality is I think he makes the point, actually, that if you do not vote, you are casting a vote, period.
Right.
And isn't that the bottom line in this thing? Mm-hmm. And the argument that people bring to the author is, well, if I don't vote for either, how am I casting a vote for one and not the other? And the reason is because you're depriving the one that you would have chosen from the vote you would have given, and that in and of itself is like
if you're forced
voting for the
vote.
other.
Yes, right.
If you were forced. And this really, the large issue that everybody's dealing with this election time is, I don't want to vote. I don't see anybody I like. They're both evil. They're both, crazy, whatever they are. Mm-hmm. And I think my response, and the author doesn't go into this so much, but my response is always kind of, we have rights in this country that are given to us, but those rights entail certain responsibilities. So, by example, if you want the right to a speedy trial, then you're going to have to serve on jury duty. If you want the right of to travel across state lines and roam this great country, then you're probably going to pay taxes so that even though I know you don't have to, try that one out, but you're going to pay taxes to do that. In the same way, if you want to have a free country, when things get hairy, you're probably going to get drafted. Mm-hmm. And so there are responsibilities that come along. And I think a part of living in a democratic republic with elected leadership and enjoying the right to vote, I think there's a responsibility to exercise that vote. Now, back to where the author is. How do you do that when you have a situation where you have two evils? The thing to remember is governments are temporary. People are temporary. As Christian people, we're not held to the boundaries of time or geography that we see in front of us. No nation is eternal. No leader or government is eternal. No great plan or great democracy is eternal. All these things are things that come and go. Only our heavenly home and our heavenly, the kingdom is the only thing that's eternal. Keeping that in mind, I'm going to do the best I can this election to vote for that person which the Lord helps me to determine, and whom I think will do the best job in the temporary. But I'm going to put my trust, as we talked about in our last segment. Right. I'm not putting my trust in Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. I'm going to put my trust in God. I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to punch a hole in the paper or draw a circle or hang a chat or whatever I have to do, and I'm going to get the job done. I want to be involved in the conversation after the election. Mm-hmm. And I think people that don't vote don't really have much of a right to be involved in the conversation, a conversation designed to make our government better and better.
Karl, this author also seems to go a little further than that, though, and actually equates the responsibility of voting with sin. He talks a great deal about a person's being irresponsible is to be sinful. Do you follow that logic, or does that seem like a fair argument there to make?
Well, my grandfather was a Polish immigrant, and if an election came around and he found out that I did not vote, he sure made me feel like I had committed a sin. It didn't matter if it was the third runoff for the county water and board commissioner. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter. If there was an election, you went and you voted. I think that with this election coming up, regardless of how you feel about either one of the candidates or both of the candidates, I think the fact that we have the opportunity to be a part of helping figure out the direction our country's going to go, mm-hmm. especially if we just talked about this in God We Trust thing. How much do we believe that God is in control of this country? If we do, and we want to see God's name not disappear from things in this nation, then we have a responsibility to go and vote. And I think that if we don't, I do feel like we're committing a sin, because we're not holding up our end of what we received. We have freedom in this country. Mm-hmm. We have great freedom in this country. We can go and we can worship anywhere we want to on Sunday morning or on Thursday night. If we want to worship a sponge, we have the freedom to do that. Okay. Now, granted, I'm not going to go worship a sponge.
SpongeBob,
but if we don't vote, and then one day we begin to see some of our freedoms, like our religious freedoms, start to go away, we don't have any voice at that point.
So how do you argue with the person that says, I have the right not to vote?
They do have that right not to vote. I just don't think they're being very smart.
It's a right. It's a right without a commensurate responsibility. They're exercising the right, but not being responsible.
That's correct.
Right.
That's
So-
correct.
So, well, then this one comes to his further in his argument again, in talking about Calvin Beisner, who wrote this article in Stream.org, where he basically, in a sense, he equates voting for a third-party candidate as also being irresponsible. A third-party candidate who has no non-miraculous way of winning.
And this part I actually take issue with, and I'll tell you why. Because movements begin in small ways. And if there's truly a movement in this country that's green or libertarian or sponges or whatever it is that's coming up, then that movement has to begin somewhere. You don't just overnight establish yourself as the Republican Party. So for people who want to
There are
make
a lot of obstacles to it right now.
Right. So people who want to make a statement and people who want to help to begin a nation thinking in a new direction, I think they should absolutely exercise their right to vote for the person that they think will take them in that direction. So I'm a little different than this fellow on that one.
Yeah, what do you think, Karl?
Well, the first presidential election I ever voted in was Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and John Anderson. And the fact is, I really wanted to see John Anderson win. I was in college at the time, and I was fascinated with this John Anderson fellow. But I do remember on Election Day looking at the ballot and looking at those three names, and I didn't know what to do because I thought, okay, if I vote for him, I'm just throwing my vote away because he'll never win. Now, I'm hearing something yesterday that one of these third-party candidates could even carry, I believe it was the state of Utah in this election. And
Well, he's about a fifth-party candidate. But
all right,
yes, right.
all right, but still, we're looking at somebody other than the two top parties who could carry a state. And so it could be that what we see happen here is if people want to vote for somebody else, and that person garners enough votes, that maybe the next time there's an election, we're going to see even more votes go to that third party. You know, that this is something, like you said, the Republican Party didn't form overnight.
Right.
Okay, this could be the beginning of something that's going to grow. And it just may take a long, long time for it to happen.
There was a brief movement a few elections ago, and I think it's actually on some ballots, but not presidential ones, where you can actually vote for none of the above. And the idea being that the parties would have to come up with somebody else if that actually gained favor. So, well, we'll continue this. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we continue on here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM107 and AM1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Karl Sorowski and also Bishop Doc Loomis, and we'll have more to come in a moment. Welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM107 and AM1240. Thanks for joining us here today. And we have been talking on this last segment about the Stream.org article, pair of articles about the choice of the lesser of two evils, and also about how one must vote in some fashion or another. And also the article we concentrated on Calvin Beisner's article, his opinion piece, saying that also voting for a third party or other party would be a wasted vote as well. Doc, you brought up a scenario, though, in that's going on in Utah, where there could be, I would think, actually, Karl, you brought it up, but Doc, you've lived there, that there's a guy running that actually may carry Utah. Is that possible? That's not one of these two?
Yes, Evan McMullen, who is actually leading, he's been back and forth leading in the polls in Utah. And he is obviously neither a Republican nor a Democrat, but he is very much beloved in the state, and there's a great deal of frustration in that state, as there is in most states, about the two candidates that are currently leading. And he has an opportunity to actually pull off a win and pull down the whatever it is, 6 or 7 electoral votes that Utah has. If in that very kind of outlying scenario he were to do that, that could cause a real problem for both of the main party candidates in the Electoral College. Depending on how things shake out, if it's at all close, then just those several votes could cause neither candidate to receive the required number to be elected, and that would throw the election back to the House, and it would be a matter of the House going through the candidates that have electoral votes and selecting one, which would be fascinating.
There's an article in the that came out yesterday in 538.com out of Utah. It says polls may be underestimating Evan McMullen's chances in Utah. Has him at 20%, has Donald Trump at 37%, and Hillary Clinton and Evan McMullen at 20% in one poll they cite here, but they also cite some problems with it, and saying that they may be underestimating him. This would be phenomenal. This would be I mean, as a political watcher, this would be great. I mean, I just would love to see some kind of monkey in the wrench.
It's interesting. The local polling being done in Utah has him way up high. Mm-hmm. The national polls that are being done on behalf of Utah, those have him down in the 20s right now. But I think that's the nature of that article. I think they've underestimated him tremendously. And I think they've underestimated the fact that people are just honked off.
Mm-hmm. Well, back to this article, and let's go back even a little further, but back to the articles here about the lesser of two evils. This would this qualify, though, as being a wrong vote by this one guy who says that if you're casting a vote for somebody who doesn't have a chance of winning, is that wrong? And Doc, you disagreed with him on this one, even though you found many of his other points salient. And Karl, what do you think is this?
Here's the deal. Somebody told me there's a church here in town, I believe it's a Baptist church, has a sign out front right now that says pray and vote. Mm-hmm. And underneath that it says vote and pray. Okay. 2 weeks from now, we may know who won the election. Okay, we may not.
Right.
We may not. I don't know. But 2 weeks from now, the election will be passed. The sun is still going to come up on that Wednesday morning, regardless of who wins the election. Okay. As a Christian, I need to pray about this election. I need to pray about who I'm going to vote for. And if I pray for who God leads me to vote for, and I feel led to vote for some third-party candidate, then that's who I would vote for. Mm-hmm. That would be my responsibility as a Christian.
This is you mentioned, Doc, about so many people in Utah and across the nation really being honked off, as you said, to use your words. This is been an election season of that. I mean, after all, you look at Donald Trump, who faced 16 other opponents in the Republican primary, and generally he won because people were honked off and just did not like all their other choices there too. And you look at the Democrat side. If there were not super delegates and we were only going on again just popular vote, Bernie Sanders might have had a better chance because people would not have felt like the fix was already in there.
Well, the challenge with all of this, to my mind, is that the problem with an angry electorate or a disenfranchised electorate is they just don't vote, period. Mm-hmm. And the best of politics is local politics. We know that. So if I'm not going to go to the polls and vote for a president, and I decide not to go to the polls, period, then I don't cast my vote for Pat McElrath or Norm Sanderson or whoever it is on the down ballot. And I think what concerns me about this is I want to know who my state representatives are. I want to know who's local, who's running here that actually, when I pick up the phone and call my state representative and he answers the telephone, I want to vote for that guy. I want to know who that person is. I want to have input into my local election. And if, like many of my millennial friends, I simply say, well, I'm not going to go and vote, well, that's just crazy. I mean, what did Norman Sanderson ever do to you? I mean, get down there and vote. We've got judges. We've got representatives. We've got people that impact our lives on a day-to-day basis. And if you want to leave the top of that thing blank, you go ahead and you deal with your morality and you deal with whether it's sin or not. But please vote for the people that are here local and having an impact on our lives.
This is an important part, Karl.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you sound like my granddad.
Right?
You don't look like my granddad, but you sound.
Glad to hear that.
You sound like my granddad.
I'm sure he was a very handsome man.
Yeah.
He was.
This is a election that began with that whole idea of people just being not happy, and with the choices, when the choices were going to be a billionaire business reality TV star versus somebody who feels like this is their turn. They've been waiting in the wings for so long, and now she's up. So it's and a lot of people don't like that. They don't like the choices.
And a lot of this comes back to what we've talked about time and again over these last few weeks, and that is how hard it is to become rightly informed, because the different news networks have their side of the story that they're going to show you. And we hear all this stuff about the polls right now. I don't know what to believe in the polls. One day Trump is up by 1%. The next day Hillary's up by 1%. This one poll shows Hillary up by 9 points. This other poll shows Trump up by 6 points or 8 points. We're not going to know until next Wednesday. We're going to get up and we're going to maybe have an answer as to who won the election.
And that brings up the issue of should we be persuaded by them at all, whatever the polls say.
Oh, no.
And look at where the history has gone now. Since the Ronald Reagan election, we've seen polls, and especially exit polling, have very difficult time actually being particularly accurate. You look at the Brexit vote in England, it was way off there. You look at Colombia, had a referendum about accepting a peace deal after a civil war that's been going on longer than any of us have been alive, and they turned it down by record numbers when it was thought the polls said it was going to be passed overwhelmingly. So.
Right. And what was it when Reagan ran against Carter? I think the polls had Carter up by 9 points.
And Carter ends up conceding before California was even closed. He even stopped voting. So,
And so what will happen is on Election Day, regardless of what has been advertised, regardless of what the candidates have said about one another, the people of this country will have an opportunity for their voice to be heard in the voting booth.
How much of this discussion, angst, is spilling over into our congregations and into our Sunday mornings? What do you think? I wasn't in. I had someone, our friend Rodney Kemp, actually filled in for me this past Sunday. But the guy who runs the video wanted to run this video about the election, and the person who was running the service for me rightly told him, I haven't previewed it, so no. I mean, I would have done the same thing because I have to be careful about how we present the subject of voting in our church. I mean, I feel like I have to be careful and mindful that I want people to vote. I'm a very political person, but I don't want to also push in a particular
right. We don't want to give the appearance that we're endorsing one candidate or another. But I do I sense angst in my congregation over this election? I do. I sense a lot of angst. But the what we can do as pastors, or what we need to do as pastors, is emphasize the importance of prayer in discerning how best to cast your vote.
In that article about voting, about whether or not it was sinful and the role of responsibility, that is an important part that we ought to consider, is that, Doc, responsibility and the role of discernment in that, and where prayer can help us with discern what is our responsibility. Do you get that? I mean, does that logic follow?
Yeah, I don't want people to get into this. The dangerous area is, I don't know how much God speaks to you all, but I really haven't been on a pillow and heard an electoral message from him. I've had more peace in my spirit about one person than another, perhaps, where he's allowed me to have a relationship with somebody and not the other. But I don't know that God intervenes quite in that way. I'm not, look, folks, if it happened to you, God bless you. I'm just saying it hasn't happened to me. I haven't had God whisper Trump in my ear in the morning or the evening. But there is a discernment, and I think it's the discernment of what the Christian's responsibility is, whether it's rendering unto Caesar or following our moral compasses. But I think that right now, God has got to keep his hand on this nation, and in order to do that, we've first got to turn to him, and after we've turned to him, he'll take care of the rest.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM107 and AM1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM107 and AM1240. Glad that you could join us here on this Sunday morning. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend I almost did it again. I keep it's just haunting. Yeah. Reverend Karl Sorowski. No, it probably would. And also Bishop Doc Loomis, as we talk about different matters of faith that are in the news, and one that is a little bit different. And perhaps if we are unqualified to talk about most subjects, this probably tops the list. But it's talk about Venezuelan politics. No, it's more than that, though. It's Pope Francis urges Maduro to listen to Venezuelans and surprise the Vatican visit. This is from The Guardian out of the UK. Venezuelan's president, Nicolas Maduro, who you may remember and may know that he succeeded Hugo Chavez, he made an unannounced trip to the Vatican on Monday and held talks with Pope Francis, who urged the embattled leader to be open to dialogue to solve the crisis in his country. A statement from the Holy See said that Francis had met Maduro because the pontiff's heart was with the Venezuelan people. Another article from Al Jazeera says that that these talks are kind of beginning, kind of, I say, because not all the factions in Venezuela are participating in this, but that the Vatican is also mediating these talks. What I drew out of these couple of articles, guys, just looking at this, is that I think Maduro, who was actually on a trip to the Middle East to try to persuade the oil producers to lessen their production to the Venezuelan oil, could have a higher value because that's their biggest asset in Venezuela. And they need it because their economy is in the tank. For lots of reasons that point back to Chavez and even Maduro here. So I think that he was popping in on the Pope, which is an incredible thing to do, just to score points back home. And I personally think that in reading this and a few other articles that he was surprised when the Vatican then offered, and in fact some say insisted, that they mediate the dialogue between Maduro and the opposition. The opposition being the legislature that wanted to kick him out, or that wanted to have a referendum on kicking him out, and other parties to other people in this. I guess, Doc, if you're looking at this story, has the Pope then perhaps taken a role here in helping in a country that's very divisive? Is taking on a role that's a proper role?
Well, let's say first and foremost that Venezuela is far from a country that's divisive. It is actually a country that's hugely unified, where the large majority, almost to unanimity, wants this guy out. That's how the referendum came about.
Right.
And so it's this gentleman and his staff, particularly the people in charge of the elections, that refused to hear a referendum coming. So, I mean, as we're recording this, so it's Wednesday morning. Last night in Venezuela, there was they started a trial in their representative body, and then last night was called for a march, and millions of people all over the country came out and started parading through the streets. And it's a very, very angry and a very tense situation. Now, having said that, and everything that you said is exactly right, Ben, I think where the Pope sees his role in this is not so much as a mediator, but I think he's trying to prevent out-and-out bloodshed and war. I think he has an opportunity, if not to bring peace, then at least to limit the damage that's going to be done, because this thing is totally off the rails right now. Yeah. This isn't one of those things that, the government's going to step in and take care of. This thing is off the rails, and these people are angry and united against this man. And I think the Pope's job, he sees his job in this as how do we limit the bloodshed and get to a resolution.
So this makes this interesting here, because here's the pontiff and his emissaries taking a role in dialogue, which may or may not be successful. I mean, but your feeling is that it just helps to stave off the violence until maybe something else.
You've got a fairly Catholic country. Yeah. You've got a Pope that says, please don't do anything rash. I'm going to take care of this personally. Maybe that throws a little water on things. But based on the fact that meeting was a while ago, and what happened yesterday, starting the trial, and then the call for marchers last night, it doesn't look like it was a very big bucket of water.
The opposition to Maduro had said that this was just an effort to buy time, that this was not a serious effort to come to some peaceful resolution here. It seems, though, that the Vatican has said, well, you asked, and so we're here, and we're intending to stay here until something does happen that brings you guys together. So, is this a proper role? Do you think, pastorally, Karl, is this something that we are sometimes often asked to step in when there's conflict in a family, when there's conflict in a church, but here he is talking about conflict in the country. Does the church have a role in helping to mediate conflict on that scale?
I don't see why the church does not have a role there. And I think I read in one of these articles that the Pope's main concern is for the goodwill, for the people of Venezuela,
especially the poor,
right? Especially the poor. And as Christians, aren't we called to be a voice for the poor, to reach out to help those that don't have a voice? We see with Maduro. Is that how you pronounce that, Maduro?
That's how I'm saying it.
What it looks like here is the old adage of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Here's this man who's the head of this country. The majority of the people in the country want him out, and he's going to do everything politically to make sure that cannot happen, and that he can serve out his term, which I believe runs until 2019 or something like that. And I don't know a lot about Venezuelan politics, but I don't think that he's going to be in office until 2019. I do think there's going to be a separation of some sort. And like you mentioned, as pastors, we deal with family crisis. A husband and a wife come in, and one of them wants to divorce and the other one doesn't. Who do they come to talk to? They come to talk to the pastor. And oftentimes in our conversations, we kind of get an idea early on how everything is going to be resolved. Are these people going to come back together? Are they going to go their separate ways? And part of our job is to help navigate them through this storm until they get to that point.
Well, I would also say, perhaps, or you can agree or disagree, but also part of our time may be to, as the opposition is accusing him of doing, is a buying time. So we allow God to do His work in that family.
Correct. So, but then the opposition leader, what's his name? Henrique Caprile. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. He accused the president of using the Pope's goodwill for his own ends. He said that Maduro was a devil, and that Maduro's people believe in nothing. They have no principles. They say they're Christians when it's convenient. You've got the couple that comes to you to talk about a divorce, and one of them says, well, let's go talk to the pastor. And they don't have any more interest in listening to God or being a Christian than anything, but coming and talking to the pastor puts them in a better light.
Puts them in a better light, but also offers the opportunity for us to introduce God into that relationship.
Yes, it does.
And that's part of the Pope's intent here, is to offer DACA, to offer God into this equation in Venezuela.
I have this image in my mind of the riots in Charlotte not all that long ago.
Right.
And during the late evening, 2 nights, there was an African-American pastor who, big guy, wore a white shirt, stood in front of the lines of police officers, between that line and the lines of protesters. And when asked why he was there, he said, "I didn't come to take sides. I came to take the middle." And I think there is a role as Christian persons. We are by our nature mediators, moderators. We try to help sides to live together in peace and harmony as best we're able to, and to express what brotherly love looks like. The role for every Christian person, whether it's a riot in Charlotte or whether it's the Pope in Venezuela, is to simply state plainly what the Word of God is and what it looks like when we treat one another like brothers and sisters in Christ. And my guess is that more than taking simply a political position, though he is a political man, he will take the position that this is what the Word of God says and rely on the overwhelming goodness of the Catholic people of Venezuela to hear him out. I think he's the man in the middle right now, clearly.
Reading in history, and especially, I guess this was in World War I more than others, is that when you had battles between Christian nations, they would call a truce at Christmas. And I just found that fascinating. And you would see it in other conflicts as well, but it was fascinating that we call this truce at Christmas, and some would say, well, it's really just convenience, just so we can ratchet up as soon as it's over. But there maybe there's an opportunity for God here.
Let's pray. Let's pray there is.
And that's where we look at any time we're divisive. So we welcome you back next Sunday for more on Faith Matters here on the Talk Station.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.